What would you do if the man you were meant to marry left you kneeling before the altar, and the contract bearing your signature could bankrupt the crown? Clara Whitmore heard the chapel doors slam before the bishop finished speaking. The Duke of Ashbourne had received a sealed letter, accusing her of hiding a clause that would place his ancestral estate under her control. Before 50 members of the aristocracy, he called their engagement a calculated fraud and abandoned her in her wedding gown. Clara did not beg him to return. Trained by her late solicitor father to recognize altered deeds, she examined the contract left upon the altar and found 13 needle holes along its binding, when the original had only 12. Someone had replaced a page. Worse, the inserted clause carried the private mark of the Prince Regent and pledged Ashbourne's lands against an enormous government debt. Clara had until midnight to prove the contract was false, or the Duke's entire inheritance would legally become collateral for the crown. The silence inside St. Bartholomew's Chapel was more brutal than laughter. Clara remained before the altar with one gloved hand resting upon the contract. Behind her, silk skirts whispered as ladies leaned toward one another. The gentlemen were less discreet. She heard the words fortune hunter, merchant's daughter, and calculated from 3 separate pews. Only minutes earlier, Adrian Wycliffe, Duke of Ashbourne, had stood beside her in a black formal coat, his expression solemn but certain. Then his uncle, Lord Malcolm Vane, had entered carrying a letter sealed in red wax. Adrian had read it once. His face had become utterly still. "Did you know of this provision?" he had demanded. Clara had barely glanced at the indicated paragraph before answering. "No. Your signature stands beneath it." "My signature stands beneath a page I did not see." Adrian's gray eyes had hardened. His father had lost nearly half the Ashbourne fortune to a fraudulent bond 20 years before, and Adrian had spent his adult life rebuilding what remained. Clara knew that history. She had simply never imagined he would use it to judge her without allowing her to speak. "You assured me this marriage was not a commercial bargain," he had said. "It was not. Then you have made a fool of me with remarkable precision." He had removed the gold ring from his hand, placed it beside the contract, and walked out. Now Bishop Harcourt cleared his throat. "Miss Whitmore, perhaps the document should be entrusted to Lord Vane until this unfortunate matter is examined." Lord Vane descended from the front pew. At 56, he possessed the polished gentleness of a man who had spent years making commands sound like favors. "You have endured quite enough," he said. "Allow me." His fingers reached for the parchment. Clara closed her hand over it. "My father drafted the original settlement. It remains part of my family's papers until its authenticity has been established." A murmur traveled through the chapel. Lord Vane's smile did not disappear, but something behind it tightened. "Your father is no longer here to verify your claim." "No," Clara replied, which makes the document itself the only witness still capable of answering. Lady Beatrice Wycliffe, Adrian's widowed aunt, rose from the second pew and approached. Unlike the others, she did not look at Clara with pity. She looked at the contract. "What have you seen?" she whispered. Clara lowered her voice. The binding was opened and sewn again. One page was substituted after my father completed the draft. "Can you prove it?" "Not here." The chapel doors opened once more. Clara's heart betrayed her with one painful beat, but it was not Adrian returning. A royal courier entered, wearing the blue and silver livery of Carlton House. Rain darkened his shoulders, though the sky had been clear when Clara arrived. He carried a narrow leather dispatch case secured with a brass clasp. "Miss Clara Whitmore?" She faced him. The courier bowed and presented a folded summons. "By instruction of His Royal Highness's private secretary, you and His Grace the Duke of Ashbourne are required to attend Carlton House at 10 o'clock this evening. You will bring the marriage settlement in its present condition." Lord Vane's expression changed for less than a second. It was enough. Clara broke the seal and read the 3 formal lines. No explanation appeared beneath them, only the order and the signature of Sir Edmund Bell, the Regent's private secretary. How could Carlton House know what happened here? Lady Beatrice asked. The courier's gaze shifted toward Lord Vane before returning to Clara. The request for examination was submitted yesterday afternoon. Yesterday. Clara looked down at the contract. Adrian had not received the accusing letter until moments before the ceremony. She herself had discovered the altered page only after he left. Yet someone had notified the Prince Regent nearly 24 hours before the supposed fraud came to light. She studied the false clause again. Beneath the promise of Ashbourne's lands lay a second condition, written in denser legal language. It stated that if the marriage failed through public repudiation by the Duke, The pledged security would become immediately reviewable by the crown. Adrian believed he had protected his estate by abandoning her. Instead, his humiliation of Clara had activated the altered contract, and whoever had arranged it had known exactly what he would do. Clara folded the summons and slipped it into the small beaded reticule hanging from her wrist. She then wrapped the disputed contract in the linen altar cloth, ignoring Bishop Harcourt's protest that the cloth belonged to the chapel. "Then you may send the bill to my father's estate," she said, and walked down the aisle with Lady Beatrice beside her. The guests moved out of their path as though public disgrace were contagious. Outside, the rain had thickened, and the white satin hem of Clara's wedding gown darkened as she crossed the churchyard. Her family carriage was waiting, but the driver would not meet her eyes. News had already traveled beyond the chapel walls. By the time they reached Whitmore House, 2 reporters stood near the iron gate, and a crowd had begun gathering across the street. Clara entered through the servants' passage, removed her veil, and went directly to the narrow office where her father had worked, until illness robbed him first of movement and then of speech. She had spent much of her childhood in that room, sorting correspondence while other girls practiced the pianoforte. When she was 12, her father had taught her to detect erased figures by holding paper against a shaded lamp. At 15, she had begun copying leases. At 20, while his hands trembled too badly to write, she drafted settlements from his dictation and checked every page against the office register. Society believed Henry Whitmore had prepared the Ashbourne marriage agreement alone. In truth, Clara had calculated every annuity, copied every property description, and numbered each sheet herself. She unlocked the lower drawer of his desk and removed a ledger bound in cracked green leather. The original contract was gone, because it had been delivered to Lord Vane 3 days earlier for the Duke's final examination, but her father's working ledger remained. On a page dated 6 weeks before his death, Clara found the entry she remembered. Settlement between Adrian Wickliffe, 8th Duke of Ashbourne, and Miss Clara Whitmore. 12 sheets, blue silk binding, 2 witnesses, no royal guarantee. "Then the 13th page cannot belong to the agreement," Lady Beatrice said. "It does not," Clara answered. "But proving that a page was added will not explain who added it, or why the crown was summoned before the alteration was revealed." She searched the desk for the thin brass measuring rule her father had used when inspecting legal papers. It was missing. So was the packet containing samples of his sealing wax. The absence chilled her more than the rain. Only 3 people had entered the office since Henry Whitmore's death: Clara, the elderly housekeeper Mrs. Finch, and Lord Vane, who had come to collect the settlement. "Malcolm was here alone?" Lady Beatrice asked. "For fewer than 5 minutes. Mrs. Finch accompanied him until a kitchen maid called her away." "You suspect him." "I observed his reaction to the royal summons. Suspicion is not proof." A commotion sounded in the front hall. Clara's younger brother Thomas entered the office with his cravat untied and fury bright in his face. At 19, he possessed their father's dark eyes, but none of his patience. "Ashbourne's bankers have frozen our accounts," he said. "They claim your fraud may expose them to liability. The warehouse manager says he cannot pay the dock workers on Friday." Clara's fingers tightened around the ledger. Her father's legal practice had supported the family, but after his death, their remaining income came from 3 warehouses near the Thames. Nearly 40 laborers depended upon them, many with families of their own. If Clara used the modest trust her father had left for her marriage to cover the wages, she would lose the only money entirely beyond her brother's control. Without it, and with her reputation destroyed, she might never possess an independent home. "Bring me the wage book," she said. Thomas stared at her. "Clara, that money is yours. And the men earned theirs. Pay them from my trust before the bank can attach it. If you do that, Ashbourne leaves you with nothing. He has already left me with nothing. I will not permit Lord Vane, or whoever arranged this, to take 40 households with me." Thomas hesitated, then crossed the room and kissed her forehead. When he left, Lady Beatrice quietly closed the door. "My nephew did not deserve the faith you placed in him today." Clara returned her attention to the ledger, because acknowledging the kindness would break the discipline holding her upright. Adrian did precisely what someone expected him to do. That does not absolve him of choosing it. Lady Beatrice inclined her head. "No, it does not." A little after 4 o'clock, Mrs. Finch brought tea and reported that a clerk from Lord Vane's office had arrived with a demand for the contract. Clara refused to surrender it, but asked the clerk to wait. She carried the linen-wrapped document into the former copying room, where the tall western window gave the strongest light. Using a magnifying lens, she compared the ink, paper fibers, page numbers, and margins with her father's ledger. The forged page was extraordinarily skillful. Its watermark matched the paper Henry Whitmore had purchased from a stationer in Fleet Street, and the handwriting closely resembled that of his senior clerk, Mr. Nathaniel Pike. Yet when Clara measured the lines against the ledger's ruled entries, she found the added text had been written with a nib slightly narrower than any kept in her father's office. At the bottom of the inserted sheet, beside the Prince Regent's private mark, was a faint brown crescent she had first mistaken for age. She touched it carefully and smelled iron, dried blood. Someone had pressed an injured thumb against the parchment before the page was bound. Clara turned to the working ledger, searching for a note that might identify who had handled the paper. Near the spine, almost hidden beneath a later entry, she found 3 words written by her father on the day Lord Vane had approved the final draft. Pike dismissed today. Clara read the line twice. Nathaniel Pike had supposedly witnessed and copied the settlement a week after the date on which her father recorded dismissing him. The official contract did not merely contain an extra page. One of its 2 legal witnesses should never have been present to sign it at all. Clara closed the ledger just as Mrs. Finch returned to announce that Lord Vane's clerk was growing impatient. "Ask him to come here," Clara said. Lady Beatrice glanced toward the disputed contract. "You intend to admit one of Malcolm's men into this room?" "I intend to learn which man he sent." Clara covered her father's ledger with a sheet of blotting paper, leaving only the final page exposed, then placed the linen-wrapped contract inside the locked desk drawer. A few minutes later, Mrs. Finch escorted a lean man into the office. He appeared to be in his early 40s, with thinning brown hair and a coat too heavy for the season. He bowed without looking directly at Clara. "Mr. Elias North, representing Lord Vane. His lordship requires the Ashbourne settlement immediately." Clara had never heard the name, but something familiar lay in the man's habit of rubbing the side of his forefinger against his thumb. "Naturally," she said. "I will release it upon receiving a signed acknowledgement stating that Lord Vane accepts responsibility for its condition." The clerk's hand stopped moving. "That is unnecessary. A document worth nearly £300,000 requires a receipt." Clara pushed a clean sheet toward him and placed a pen beside it. "Write your name, your employer's name, the hour, and the purpose for which you are taking it." He looked at the pen but did not touch it. "Lord Vane did not authorize me to sign anything. Then he did not authorize you to receive anything." The man's eyes flicked toward the covered ledger. Lady Beatrice stepped between him and the desk. "You heard Miss Whitmore." At last, he took a pen from his own pocket. Its nib was unusually narrow. He wrote 3 hurried lines, signed Elias North, and sprinkled sand across the ink. Clara watched his right hand. A pale scar crossed the pad of his thumb in the shape of a crescent. When he finished, she lifted the receipt but did not reach for the contract. "Your hand has changed, Mr. Pike, but not sufficiently." His face emptied of color. Lady Beatrice turned sharply toward him. "Nathaniel Pike?" Clara laid her father's dismissal entry beside the receipt. "My father taught me that men may disguise the slope of their letters, but seldom the distance they leave between words. Mr. Pike always crowds a capital after a comma. He also forms the tail of his G as a closed loop. Both habits appear in the witness signature on the disputed settlement, and in the name he has just written." Pike backed toward the door. "You are mistaken. Then remove your glove." He stared at her. "Why?" "Because the false page carries a blood mark matching the curve of the scar on your thumb. If the injury is recent, the skin beneath your glove will tell us." Pike seized the receipt, but Lady Beatrice caught his wrist before he could tear it. He pulled free and knocked over the sand shaker. Thomas appeared in the doorway at the sound. "Shall I call a constable?" he asked. "No," Clara said. Pike looked almost relieved until she added, "A constable would arrest only the man who bled upon the paper. I want the person who ordered him to place it there." Pike's fear sharpened. "You know nothing about that page. I know it was copied with your pen. I know you signed it after my father dismissed you, and I know Lord Vane sent you under a false name to recover it before I could take it to Carlton House. His lordship sent me because you stole his property. The settlement belongs jointly to both parties, until the marriage is executed or formally dissolved. Lord Vane is neither party." Pike glanced once more at the covered ledger, then fled past Thomas and down the passage. Clara did not stop him. Instead, she picked up the pen he had dropped beside the chair. A dark stain marked the wooden holder, and the narrow steel nib still carried wet black ink. She wrapped it in a handkerchief and gave it to Lady Beatrice. "Keep this with you. Do not give it to me, Thomas, or anyone connected with this house." Lady Beatrice accepted it without question. "Why allow him to leave?" Thomas demanded. "Because Pike is frightened enough to run to the person who employed him. If we arrest him now, Lord Vane will deny knowing him and replace every record before nightfall." Clara crossed to the window. Pike emerged through the front gate, looked in both directions, and hurried east instead of west. Lord Vane's residence lay west of Whitmore House, but his legal chambers were east, near Lincoln's Inn. "Follow him," Clara told Thomas. "Remain far enough behind that he does not recognize you. Record where he goes and whom he meets. Do not confront anyone." Thomas took his coat and left through the servants' entrance. Clara then examined the receipt beneath her father's magnifying lens. Pike had written with the same narrow nib used on the inserted clause, but another detail caught her attention. The paper he had brought from Lord Vane's office carried a watermark of a crowned heron. She held the disputed page against the window. A crowned heron appeared faintly beneath the Prince Regent's mark. The false page had not come from Henry Whitmore's supply after all. It had come from stationery purchased for Lord Vane's private chambers. "That gives us origin, not authorship," Clara said, "but it proves the substitution was deliberate." Before Lady Beatrice could answer, wheels stopped violently outside. A footman opened the front door, and Adrian's voice sounded from the hall. "Where is Miss Whitmore?" He entered the office without waiting to be announced, rain glistening on the shoulders of the same black coat he had worn at the altar. Lord Vane followed him at a calmer pace. Adrian's gaze moved from Clara's discarded veil to the open ledger, and finally to the receipt in Lady Beatrice's hand. "My uncle informs me you refuse to surrender the settlement. Your uncle sent a dismissed clerk under a false name to retrieve it," Clara replied. Lord Vane's expression remained composed. "I employ no man named Pike." Clara lifted the sheet bearing the crowned heron watermark. "Then, perhaps you can explain why the forged page and your office paper were made by the same mill." For the first time since entering the room, Adrian looked at his uncle instead of Clara. Lord Vane answered without hesitation. "Because Henry Whitmore purchased his legal paper through my account. Miss Whitmore knows that perfectly well." Clara nearly challenged him, but a memory stopped her. Her father had indeed complained once that Lord Vane insisted on ordering paper for both offices to reduce expense. The watermark alone could not distinguish their supplies. Malcolm's explanation was plausible, because he had prepared it in advance. Then Clara noticed the edge of a folded invoice protruding from his breast pocket. At its corner was the crowned heron emblem, and beneath it, written in a stationer's red pencil, a delivery date from only 9 days earlier. Henry Whitmore had been dead for 7 months. The false page could not have come from any paper her father had purchased. Clara kept her gaze on the red delivery date visible above Lord Vane's pocket. If she accused him too quickly, he would destroy the invoice before anyone else could inspect it. "Your explanation is reasonable," she said. "The paper might have been ordered through your account while my father was alive." Malcolm relaxed by a fraction. Adrian did not. He had known Clara long enough to recognize the deliberate calm she used whenever she was withholding a conclusion. "Might have been?" he asked. Clara turned toward him. "The stationer's invoice in your uncle's pocket bears a date from 9 days ago." Lord Vane immediately buttoned his coat. "You are mistaken." "Then show his grace the invoice. My private correspondence is none of Miss Whitmore's concern." Adrian extended his hand. "Give it to me, uncle." Malcolm's expression hardened. "You would humiliate me on the word of the woman who attempted to seize your estate? I humiliated her on your word this morning. I am trying not to make the same error twice." The sentence did not repair what Adrian had done, but it was the first indication that he understood the error belonged to him, rather than solely to the evidence placed before him. Lord Vane removed the folded paper and handed it over. Adrian read the date, then opened the invoice fully. 200 sheets of crowned heron bond paper, delivered to Vane Chambers 9 days ago. "Paper purchased for ordinary business," Malcolm replied. "Available to every clerk in my office. If Pike stole a sheet, I am as much his victim as either of you." Clara noticed how skillfully he shifted position, from denying Pike's employment to presenting himself as the betrayed employer, without admitting the contradiction. Adrian noticed it too. "You said you employed no man named Pike." "Not under that name. Elias North was recommended to me 6 months ago. I had no knowledge of his former identity." "Who recommended him?" Clara asked. "I do not recall." "You remembered enough about my father's paper orders to explain the watermark." Malcolm smiled coldly. "A commercial solicitor's daughter may enjoy interrogating clerks, Miss Whitmore, but you are not entitled to interrogate a peer." "No. Tonight the Prince Regent's secretary may do it for me." The smile disappeared. Adrian placed the invoice on Clara's desk. "It remains here with the contract. That invoice concerns my chambers, and possibly the forgery attached to my estate." Adrian's voice was quiet, but the authority in it changed the room. Malcolm stared at his nephew for several seconds before turning away. "You are allowing sentiment to replace judgment." Clara felt the insult strike more deeply, because Adrian had used nearly the same accusation against her at the altar. He answered without looking at her. Sentiment did not identify the false witness, the altered binding, or the recent paper. Miss Whitmore did. It was not an apology. It was public acknowledgement of her competence, given before the man whose approval Adrian had trusted all his life. For the first time, Clara saw Lord Vane look at her, not as an inconvenience but as a threat. A pounding at the front door interrupted them. Mrs. Finch entered moments later, pale and breathless. "Miss Clara, there are men outside demanding Master Thomas. They say he assaulted a clerk near Lincoln's Inn." Clara's heart dropped. "Thomas has not returned?" "No, miss." Lord Vane gave an expression of solemn regret. "If your brother followed Pike and attacked him, the authorities must handle the matter." "How did you know Thomas followed Pike?" Clara asked. Silence settled over the office. Malcolm had not been present when she sent Thomas away, and no one in the room had mentioned it since his arrival. "I assumed he did," he said. "Young men behave rashly when their families are disgraced." Two constables entered behind Mrs. Finch, accompanied by a broad-shouldered man with a bruised cheek. Clara recognized neither of them, but the injured man claimed Thomas had struck him and stolen a leather dispatch case belonging to Lord Vane's office. "We have a witness," one constable said. A crossing sweeper saw the whole business. "My brother has been gone less than an hour," Clara replied. "Where did this alleged assault occur?" "Chancery Lane." "Then the timing is impossible. Even in a fast carriage, Thomas could not have left this house on foot, reached Chancery Lane, committed the assault, and vanished before your witness found you and brought you here." The constable shifted uneasily. "The complaint gives the time as 4:30. Clara looked at the mantel clock. It showed 12 minutes past 5. Thomas left this office at 11 minutes before 5. Lady Beatrice, Mrs. Finch, Lord Vane, the Duke, and I can all establish that. Malcolm's jaw tightened. The injured man suddenly seemed less certain. Adrian stepped toward him. "Who paid you?" "No one, your grace." "Then you will have no objection to repeating your accusation before a magistrate, where a false statement may send you to prison." The man bolted. One constable caught his sleeve, but he tore free, crashed through the front doorway, and disappeared into the crowd outside. The constables apologized stiffly and left to pursue him. Clara turned to Lord Vane. "Someone expected me to sacrifice my examination at Carlton House in order to search for Thomas." Malcolm's face revealed nothing. "You see conspiracy in every misfortune now." "No, only in misfortunes prepared before they could possibly occur." Adrian's gaze remained fixed on his uncle. "Leave us." Malcolm inclined his head with controlled dignity. At the doorway he paused. "A final warning, Clara. The Regent's Court will not admire a woman who mistakes cleverness for station. Read that contract publicly tonight, and you will implicate your dead father as surely as you implicate my office." He departed before Clara could answer. Adrian waited until the carriage rolled away, then said, "He knows what the inserted clause contains. So do you. I knew it pledged Ashbourne. I did not know it could implicate your father." Clara unfolded the false page and examined the final lines again. Malcolm had mentioned something neither she nor Adrian had stated aloud, that reading the contract would expose Henry Whitmore. Near the royal mark was a reference to a separate certificate of authorization supposedly prepared by her father. The certificate had not been attached to the settlement, yet Malcolm knew it existed. Before Clara could speak, Thomas stumbled through the servants' entrance, his coat torn and blood running from his temple. He carried a scorched leather dispatch case. "Pike went to Vane Chambers," he gasped. "Someone was waiting for him. They tried to burn this before I could take it." Clara caught her brother as his knees buckled. Inside the damaged case, beneath a layer of ash, lay a list of payments bearing Henry Whitmore's signature, and every payment was dated months after his death. Clara and Adrian lowered Thomas onto the leather settee, while Lady Beatrice sent for a physician. The wound at his temple was shallow, but his left wrist had already begun to swell. "Two men attacked me outside Vane Chambers," he said through clenched teeth. Pike handed the case to one of them, and the other carried it toward a brazier in the courtyard. "I seized it before the flames took hold." Clara examined the scorched papers without disturbing their order. The first sheet listed 6 payments totaling £48,000. Each bore Henry Whitmore's signature, although the earliest was dated 2 months after his funeral. The recipients were identified only by initials, but the final column referred to certificates issued through the Royal Naval Provisioning Office. Adrian leaned over the desk. "My father's ruined bond also concerned naval supplies. Then whoever forged these payments is connecting my father to the debt attached to your estate," Clara said. "And the dispatch case was left where Thomas could take it. A man trying to destroy evidence would have burned the papers before carrying them into an open courtyard." Thomas stared at her. "You believe they wanted me to steal it?" "They wanted these documents found in our possession." Adrian's jaw tightened. "Then we take nothing from this house except the settlement. Sir Edmund must examine the papers here." If Malcolm controls the men sent to collect them, leaving the evidence here will not protect it. Clara separated one partially burned sheet and found a number written near the lower edge, 417C. She opened her father's working ledger and searched the index. The same number appeared beside an inactive trust account established in Clara's name when she was 16. It had held her mother's inheritance until that morning, when Clara ordered the remaining balance used for the warehouse wages. "This is not merely my father's signature," she said. "The payments appear to originate from my trust." Adrian looked at her. "Could anyone else access it?" "My father served as trustee until his death. Lord Vane became temporary executor because Thomas was not yet of age. Then your uncle by marriage had access," Lady Beatrice said. "So did Clara," Adrian replied. The words were factual, not accusatory, but they reopened the wound he had inflicted at the altar. Clara met his gaze. "Yes, I had lawful access to my own money. If that remains sufficient reason for you to suspect me, say so before we enter Carlton House." Adrian was silent too long. "I am saying every fact must be acknowledged. You acknowledged none of the facts in my favor this morning." Shame passed across his face, but before he could answer, the physician arrived. Clara remained beside Thomas, while his wound was cleaned and stitched. The delay cost nearly 2 hours. At 7, a second royal courier delivered instructions that Clara and Adrian were to attend a preliminary examination at 8:30, rather than 10. The Prince Regent would not be present, but his private secretary and 2 Treasury commissioners would receive the settlement. Clara changed into a plain dark blue gown, secured the contract inside a leather portfolio, and placed her father's ledger beside it. Lady Beatrice kept Pike's pen in her own reticule, while Thomas remained under Mrs. Finch's care. Adrian offered Clara his carriage. She accepted only because traveling separately would give Lord Vane another opportunity to intercept her. Neither spoke until the carriage entered Pall Mall. "I should have listened to you in the chapel," Adrian said. Clara watched the rain slide across the window. "Yes." He seemed unprepared for the simplicity of the answer. "I believed I was preventing the same deception that destroyed my father. You believed fear entitled you to condemn me publicly. I cannot alter what I did. No, you can only decide what you will do when fear returns." The carriage stopped beneath the portico of Carlton House before he could respond. Sir Edmund Bell received them in a private library, where 2 Treasury commissioners waited beside Lord Vane. Malcolm had changed his coat and wore the expression of a concerned statesman. The damaged dispatch case already sat upon the table. Clara stopped in the doorway. "How did that come here?" "Royal officers collected it from Whitmore House," Sir Edmund said. "His Grace authorized the seizure of all relevant evidence." Clara turned toward Adrian. "You gave them permission to search my home?" "I authorized the preservation of the papers," he answered, "without consulting me. There was no time." Once again, he had allowed urgency to replace trust. Worse, the officers had taken the case while Clara was changing clothes, giving unknown hands custody of every paper inside it. Sir Edmund asked for the marriage settlement. Adrian reached for Clara's portfolio. She held it closed. "I will place it on the table myself." She recorded the time aloud, named every person present, and made Sir Edmund acknowledge that the binding contained 13 sheets before she released it. One commissioner examined the false clause while the other opened the burned payment list. "Miss Whitmore," he said, "did your father teach you to imitate his signature?" "He taught me to verify it." "That was not my question." "Yes, I could reproduce his hand when illness required me to write under his direction, but every such document was witnessed and marked as dictated." Lord Vane sighed. A distinction impossible to prove now. The library door opened, and 2 guards escorted Nathaniel Pike inside. His thumb was bandaged, and his face carried the exhausted fear of a man who had rehearsed a lie until it almost resembled memory. "That is the woman who instructed me," he said, pointing at Clara. Miss Whitmore ordered the extra page prepared. She said the Duke would abandon her once he saw it, and that the repudiation clause would place Ashbourne's estate under royal review. Lady Beatrice stepped forward. "You came to her house under a false name, because she threatened to expose our arrangement if I did not recover the contract." Pike produced 3 letters bearing Clara's signature. In them, she appeared to promise him £5,000 for copying Henry Whitmore's hand and attaching the Prince Regent's private mark. The final letter directed payment from account 417C. Clara examined the first sheet. The handwriting was an excellent imitation of her own. The paper carried the Whitmore crest, and the wax matched the blue seal kept in her father's office, the same wax packet that had disappeared. "These were planted," she said. "Naturally," Lord Vane replied, "as were the contract, the witnesses, the bank account, and every inconvenient fact. Adrian looked from the letters to Clara. Can you identify anything false in them? She studied the lines under the library lamps. Whoever had produced them knew her hand, her phrasing, and the unusual way she crossed a double T. For the first time that day, she found no immediate defect. Not yet. Sir Edmund ordered the guards to remain beside her, and broke the royal seal securing the treasury schedule attached to the settlement. Until this matter is resolved, Miss Whitmore will be confined at Carlton House. The contract and ledger will remain in Crown custody. Clara's portfolio, reticule, and gloves were taken. Adrian protested the confinement, but could not withdraw the testimony he had already given, that Clara possessed the skill, access, and apparent financial motive required to create the forgery. As a guard moved her toward the adjoining chamber, Clara glanced at the treasury schedule. The government debt was not due to be examined at midnight, as she had first believed. It was due to be redeemed. At £48,000 in fraudulent certificates would be exchanged for nearly £300,000 from the royal treasury, secured against Ashbourne's estate. The forged marriage contract was never intended merely to steal Adrian's lands or disgrace Clara. It was designed to make the crown pay for worthless certificates before anyone could examine the naval accounts, and her arrest ensured that the only person capable of identifying the false entries would be locked away when the redemption occurred. The adjoining chamber contained no lock on the inside. 2 guards stood beyond the door, and a tall window overlooked a courtyard too far below for escape. Clara did not waste time testing either. She reconstructed the treasury schedule from memory, repeating the figures until she could see their order as clearly as if the parchment still lay before her. 6 certificates, £48,000 originally paid, nearly £300,000 due upon redemption. Each certificate referred to naval provisions supposedly delivered through Ashbourne Quay during the final year of the war. That detail troubled her. Adrian's estate possessed river access, but the quay had never been large enough to handle the quantities listed. She had examined the estate accounts while helping her father prepare the marriage settlement. Ashbourne collected fees from every vessel using the quay, and those fees had declined during the year in question because one of its 2 cranes was being repaired. Before Clara could complete the calculation, raised voices sounded in the library. She knocked sharply. "Tell Sir Edmund I must speak to him before the first certificate is redeemed." One guard ignored her. The other said, "You are not permitted to communicate with the commissioners. You then inform him that certificate number 31 claims delivery of 1,200 barrels through a quay, capable of unloading fewer than 400 during the stated week." The guard hesitated. "If the Crown loses £250,000 because you refuse to repeat that sentence, your orders will not protect you." The door opened several minutes later. Adrian stood beyond it, his expression grim. "The first claimant has arrived early," he said. A banking agent presented one of the certificates at the treasury entrance. "Sir Edmund intends to honor it at 10. What time is it?" 9:43. Clara moved past him into the library. Lord Vane and Pike were gone, but the commissioners remained. A red dispatch box had been opened on the table, revealing bundles of bank drafts already prepared in the claimants' names. "Those drafts cannot be released," Clara said. The senior commissioner, Sir Lionel Marsh, regarded her with open irritation. "You are accused of creating the instruments. Your objection is hardly independent. Then verify the cargo capacity without believing me. Certificate 31 records 1,200 barrels of salted beef delivered at Ashbourne Quay between the 3rd and 9th of June. One crane was dismantled that month, and the remaining crane could not unload more than 60 barrels a day." Adrian turned to the commissioner. "She is correct about the crane. I paid for its repair." Sir Lionel examined the schedule. "The certificate bears the signatures of 2 naval inspectors." "Inspectors certify the goods after unloading," Clara replied. "Where are the K tallies proving the barrels ever arrived?" "The certificates themselves constitute proof." "No, they constitute claims. A claim repeated under 2 signatures does not become a physical shipment." The second commissioner began calculating the quantities on a spare sheet. Even with both cranes operational, the stated deliveries would have required more vessels than the quay could berth. Sir Edmund frowned. "Where are the original unloading records?" "The Royal Naval Provisioning Office keeps duplicate tallies at its Deptford warehouse," Clara said. "My father once disputed an incorrectly assessed shipment and showed me how the system worked. Each quay master cut notches into a wooden tally stick, split it lengthwise, and sent one half to the supplier and the other to the naval storekeeper. Ink can be forged. Matching wood cannot." Sir Lionel closed the red dispatch box. "We cannot suspend a royal redemption merely because tally sticks may exist somewhere in Deptford." A messenger entered before Clara could answer and handed him a notice. As he read, his face drained of color. 2 more certificates have been presented at the west entrance. The scheme was accelerating. Someone had learned that Clara identified the cargo discrepancy and ordered every claimant to redeem before the proof could be reached. Sir Edmund instructed the guards to seal the treasury doors, but Sir Lionel objected that refusing instruments bearing the Prince Regent's private mark without his direct authorization could trigger a public run on other government certificates. The Regent had retired to a private dinner and could not be approached without the Lord Chamberlain. Every official possessed a reason to delay, and the men outside needed only 17 minutes. "There is another way," Clara said. "Ashbourne's estate is the security behind the redemption. His Grace may formally dispute the debt and order his bank to refuse the Crown's draft until the physical tallies are inspected." Sir Lionel stared at Adrian. "That would be obstruction of a royal financial instrument. Your lands could be placed in immediate receivership. They will be taken under the forged contract if I do nothing," Adrian said. "If the certificates prove genuine, you could also lose your seat in the Lords." Clara turned to him. "Do not agree merely because you regret what happened this morning. This risk may cost you everything your father left." Adrian's eyes held hers. "My father spent his last years teaching me that one betrayal justified distrusting the world. Today I used that lesson to destroy the one person who had never deceived me. I will not call fear prudence a second time." He signed an order directing Ashbourne Bank to refuse all drafts associated with the disputed settlement for 6 hours. Sir Lionel warned that the Crown would hold him personally responsible for the entire sum if the tallies were not produced. Adrian handed him the signed order. "Then hold me responsible." A rider departed for the bank at 9:52. The treasury doors remained closed, but the delay created a new problem. The naval tallies had to be recovered and authenticated before 4 in the morning, when Adrian's order expired. Clara was still formally detained. Sir Edmund would not release her, and he refused to send a woman accused of forgery into Crown warehouses. Adrian placed his signet ring on the table. "Release Miss Whitmore into my custody. If she fails to return, treat my signet as a pledge of surrender, and arrest me in her place. You cannot pledge a dukedom for a prisoner," Sir Edmund said. "No, but I can remain here while she goes." Clara shook her head. "I need you at Deptford. The storekeeper may refuse access to me, but he cannot easily refuse the landowner named upon the certificates." Lady Beatrice stepped forward and offered her own hand. "I will remain as surety. I am the widow of an admiral and a member of the Wycliffe family. If Clara flees, disgrace me publicly beside her." Sir Edmund finally agreed, but ordered 2 guards to accompany them. At 10 minutes past 10, Clara and Adrian left Carlton House in his carriage, with the contract figures copied onto a single sheet. Rain had slowed the roads, and Deptford lay several miles away. During the journey, Clara calculated the true maximum cargo from the key fees she remembered. Adrian supplied the dates of the crane repair, and the names of 3 captains who had used the berth. Their separate knowledge fitted together with an ease that made the silence after each answer more painful. Shortly before 11, the carriage descended toward the river. A bell began ringing in the distance. Then another answered it. Adrian lowered the window, and smoke entered immediately. An orange glow spread above the rooftops ahead of them. Their driver shouted that the naval warehouse was burning. Clara looked at the certificate numbers in her hand and understood why the claimants had presented them early. The conspirators did not merely intend to redeem the forgeries before the tallies could be examined. They intended to burn the only physical records capable of disproving them. Adrian ordered the driver forward. The carriage rounded the final corner, revealing flames pouring through the warehouse roof, while workers struggled against doors that had been chained from the outside. Somewhere inside that building were the tally sticks they needed before 4 in the morning, and men who would die long before then, unless Clara found a way to reach them. Clara left the carriage before it had fully stopped. Dock workers were throwing buckets of river water against the warehouse doors, but the flames had already reached the upper windows, and every impact against the chained entrance sent sparks through the gaps. "Do not break the main doors," she shouted. "The sudden air will drive the fire through the entire ground floor." Several men stared at her, unwilling to accept instructions from a sootless woman in a blue evening gown. But Adrian reinforced the order with a voice that carried across the quay. "Do as Miss Whitmore says." Clara had seen 2 warehouse fires near her family's property. In both, men had died because a crowd opened the largest entrance and fed the flames faster than water could suppress them. She walked along the eastern wall, shielding her face from the heat. The bricks near the center were scorching, but those surrounding a narrow barred window remained cool. The counting room behind it was separated from the storage floor by a masonry wall. A hand struck the glass from inside. "There are men alive here," Clara called. Adrian and the royal guards joined her. Through the smoke-streaked pane, they saw 4 workers crouched beneath the window, and a 5th man lying unconscious near the door. Iron bars had been fitted into stone sockets outside. "The carriage horses," Clara said. "Loop the traces around the bars and pull them outward." The driver objected that the harness might break, but Adrian had already removed his coat and was fastening the leather himself. Clara soaked a blanket in a water barrel and pushed it through the broken pane. One trapped worker wrapped it around the unconscious man. On Adrian's command, the horses strained. The first trace slipped, cutting his palm, but he retied it and ordered them forward again. Mortar cracked. The bars tore free, and the workers dragged their unconscious companion through the opening, moments before fire broke through the counting room door. Clara helped lower the last man to the ground. He was an elderly storekeeper with burned hair and blistered hands. "The tallies," she said. "Where are the Ashbourne key tallies?" His eyes struggled to focus. "Iron cabinet. Lower records room. Can it survive the fire?" "Cabinet might. Floor will not." A section of the roof collapsed with a roar. Adrian caught Clara around the waist and pulled her backward, as burning slate shattered where she had stood. For a moment, her back was pressed against his chest, and his bleeding hand rested across her ribs. He released her immediately. "You cannot go inside. I did not propose to." She looked toward the riverside of the warehouse. A row of loading shutters stood above the quay, each connected to a pulley used for lifting cargo. The lowest shutter belonged to the records room and remained untouched by flame, but it was nearly 15 feet above the water. "The iron cabinet is beneath that opening. If we pull it through the shutter from outside, no one needs to cross the burning floor." The storekeeper produced a ring of keys, but said the pulley hook was stored inside. Adrian pointed toward a cargo barge moored nearby. Its deck crane carried a chain ending in an iron grapple. Within minutes, the dock workers had maneuvered the barge alongside the warehouse. Clara directed them to break only the records room shutter, then lower the grapple behind the cabinet. Smoke poured from the opening, but the fire had not yet penetrated the masonry chamber. The first attempt caught a shelf and pulled hundreds of ledgers into the river. The second hooked the cabinet handle. Wood beams groaned overhead as the men turned the crane wheel. The iron cabinet scraped across the floor, struck the window frame, and fell onto the barge deck just as the records room ceiling collapsed behind it. The storekeeper unlocked the cabinet with trembling hands. Inside were rows of split tally sticks arranged by quay, year, and supplier. Several compartments had been emptied. Clara found the space marked Ashbourne, June, but only one stick remained, blackened at one end. Its notches recorded 320 barrels, not 1,200. The certificate number carved into its side was 31, the same instrument presented at Carlton House. "This disproves one certificate," Adrian said, "if the Crown accepts the storekeeper's authentication." The old man shook his head. "It should have a matching half at Ashbourne Quay. Supplier keeps one, Navy keeps the other." Adrian looked at Clara. "My father's old records are stored in the estate muniment room. Malcolm supervised their transfer after his death. Then we must reach them before he does." Clara inspected the remaining compartments. The missing tally spaces corresponded exactly to the other 5 forged certificates. Someone had removed only the records needed to challenge the fraud before setting the fire. Beneath the sticks lay a withdrawal register. The final entry stated that 6 Ashbourne tallies had been collected that morning for inspection by a Treasury representative. The signature was a hurried set of initials, E.N. Elias North, the false name Pike had used at Whitmore House. Beside the initials was an imprint pressed into green wax. It did not show Lord Vane's crest. It showed the crowned lion of the Prince Regent's private office. "Pike had access to a royal seal," Adrian said. "Or someone within Carlton House gave him one." Clara remembered the royal courier's gaze shifting toward Lord Vane in the chapel, and the extraordinary speed with which every summons and seizure had been issued. Malcolm could not have arranged the scheme through ordinary influence alone. He had an accomplice close enough to the regent to obtain private schedules, seals, and prepared treasury drafts. The old storekeeper, whose name was Josiah Crane, agreed to return with them and authenticate the surviving tally. Before they departed, Adrian's wounded hand required binding. Clara tore a clean strip from the underskirt of her gown and wrapped his palm. "You saved 5 men tonight," he said quietly. "The dock workers saved them. I saw where to place their strength. You have done that all day, seen what every man with greater authority overlooked." The admiration in his voice was more dangerous than tenderness would have been. Clara tied the bandage and stepped back. "Respect does not erase what happened at the altar. I know." Rain ran down his face, cutting pale lines through the soot. "When my father discovered the bond that ruined him, my mother insisted his oldest friend had forged it. He refused to believe her. By the time he learned she was right, she had left him and died without returning. I despised him for trusting the wrong person. This morning, I became him. Clara looked at the fire reflected in his eyes. Then do not ask me to comfort you for understanding the pain you caused. I will not. I only want you to know that I finally understand its shape. That answer cost him something, because it sought neither forgiveness nor reassurance. Clara placed the surviving tally and withdrawal register inside the iron dispatch box, carried by one of the royal guards. Josiah Crane kept the key, while Adrian sealed the box with wax borrowed from the warehouse office. 3 separate people now controlled its custody. As they prepared to leave for Carlton House, Clara noticed a solitary rider watching from beneath the archway at the end of the quay. The man turned his horse the moment she saw him. A flash of lightning illuminated his face. It was Nathaniel Pike. He had witnessed the rescue, seen the iron cabinet recovered, and now knew they possessed the surviving tally. Adrian ordered one guard to follow, but Pike vanished into the rain-darkened streets. By the time Clara climbed into the carriage, the deeper danger was clear. Lord Vane's conspiracy had failed to destroy every physical record, but he now knew exactly which proof had survived, and who was carrying it back to the crown. The return journey had barely begun, when the royal guard seated beside the iron box drew a pistol. He pressed its barrel against Josiah Crane's ribs, and ordered the driver to stop beneath a deserted railway arch. The second guard reached for his sword, but a shot shattered the carriage window before he could rise. 3 mounted men surrounded them, their faces hidden by rain capes. "Hand over the key," the traitorous guard told Josiah. Clara saw Adrian shift toward him, and caught Adrian's sleeve. A struggle inside the confined carriage would kill the old storekeeper first. Josiah surrendered the key, but the guard still could not open the box because Adrian's wax seal covered the lock. "Break it," one rider ordered. The guard struck the seal with his pistol. Adrian moved then, knocking the weapon upward as it fired. The ball tore through the carriage roof. Clara pulled Josiah to the floor, while the loyal guard grappled with the traitor. The carriage lurched as the driver whipped the horses forward. One rider seized the door handle, but Adrian kicked him into the road. Another fired, striking the iron box rather than the people behind it. The third rider overtook the driver and cut the traces. The carriage overturned against the arch wall. Clara struck her shoulder and lost her breath. Through blurred vision, she saw the traitorous guard crawl from the wreckage with the iron box. The mounted men dragged him onto a spare horse and disappeared toward London. Adrian tried to follow, but his injured hand failed when he gripped the broken door. By the time the surviving horses were recovered, the attackers were gone. Josiah still possessed the key, but the box, the tally, and the withdrawal register had been taken. The loyal guard, Sergeant William Hales, swore that his companion had joined the royal household only 3 weeks earlier, under written recommendation from Sir Edmund's deputy secretary. That connection confirmed an accomplice inside Carlton House, but did not identify him. They returned shortly after 1 in the morning, with torn clothing, empty hands, and only Sergeant Hales's testimony. Lord Vane was waiting in the great drawing room, with Sir Lionel, Sir Edmund, Lady Beatrice, and nearly 24 officials and noblemen summoned as witnesses to Adrian's refusal of the crown drafts. The gathering transformed the private inquiry into a public humiliation. Malcolm announced that the certificates had been examined and found valid. Worse, a courier from Ashbourne had delivered the supplier's half of tally number 31. It recorded 1,200 barrels and fitted precisely against a naval half supposedly recovered from a secure treasury collection. "That is impossible," Josiah said. Sir Lionel placed the joined pieces upon the table. Their grain, notches, and cut edges appeared to match. The tally Clara had recovered from the fire was now missing, while a second pair supported the forged certificate. Lord Vane produced another document showing that £200 had been deposited into Josiah's account from Clara's trust 6 days earlier. "She paid the storekeeper to substitute a false tally," he declared. Josiah denied receiving the money, but the bank record bore his mark. Every piece of proof Clara found had been anticipated, replaced, or turned against her. Sergeant Hales reported the ambush, yet Lord Vane dismissed it as a desperate invention. The traitorous guard had vanished, and the carriage wreck could prove only that violence occurred, not who ordered it. "This has gone far enough," Malcolm said. Miss Whitmore forged the settlement, recruited a dismissed clerk, bribed a naval storekeeper, and persuaded Ashbourne to obstruct the crown. Her motive was simple. If the Duke honored their marriage, she gained control through the hidden clause. If he rejected her, she profited through the fraudulent certificates. Adrian stepped beside Clara. "Then explain why she identified the fraud before any payment was released." "Because she feared Pike would betray her." "Explain why the warehouse doors were chained from outside." A fire attracts thieves and opportunists. Explain the attack upon our carriage. Malcolm's patience appeared almost paternal. You are defending her because shame has replaced judgment. You abandoned an innocent bride once and now cannot bear to consider that you may have been right. The cruelty of the argument lay in its precision. Malcolm used Adrian's remorse as proof that his support could not be trusted. Sir Lionel announced that Adrian's order to Ashbourne Bank had expired. Unless he withdrew his accusation, accepted the certificates, and surrendered Clara for prosecution, the Crown would place his estates in receivership before dawn. Lord Vane, as senior male trustee named in the late Duke's will, would administer them during the inquiry. Clara understood then that the scheme's reward was greater than the certificates. Malcolm intended to control Ashbourne itself. Withdraw the order, she told Adrian quietly. If you lose the estate, he gains the authority to destroy every remaining record. Adrian looked at the uncle who had raised him after his father's death, then at the officials waiting for his surrender. If I withdraw it, the Crown pays the forgeries and you go to prison. Your refusal may not prevent either. Perhaps not, but this morning I used my rank to condemn you without a hearing. Tonight I will use it to demand one. Adrian removed the Wycliffe family chain from his neck and placed it beside the treasury drafts. I will not withdraw my dispute. If receivership is the price of examining the truth, take Ashbourne. Sir Lionel formally suspended his authority over the estate and named Lord Vane interim receiver. Malcolm accepted with the solemnity of a man pretending not to receive precisely what he desired. Adrian had surrendered his income, lands, political influence, and ancestral home to preserve Clara's right to be heard. Yet the public record now described him as a compromised fool assisting a forger. Clara was ordered back into custody. As the guards approached, Lady Beatrice pressed Pike's narrow-nibbed pen into Clara's hand before anyone noticed. Clara stared at it, remembering the first false page, the blood crescent, the recent crowned heron paper, and Malcolm's warning that reading the contract would implicate her father. One thought halted her despair. Malcolm had known about Henry Whitmore's supposed authorization certificate before Sir Edmund opened the sealed treasury schedule. He had also arranged a royal summons the day before Adrian received the accusing letter. At every stage, Malcolm knew what officials would discover before they officially discovered it. Yet he continued pretending his knowledge came from evidence revealed afterward. Destroying the tally had not repaired that impossible chronology. It had made him confident enough to repeat it before witnesses. Clara turned to Sir Edmund. I request a full public hearing before His Royal Highness. Not a summary, not an examination behind closed doors. I will read every line of the marriage contract aloud, including the dates, conditions, and certificate references. Lord Vane's composure finally cracked. That would expose confidential Crown obligations. Obligations you claimed not to know existed until tonight. He recovered quickly, but too late. Sir Edmund had heard the contradiction. Clara allowed the guards to take her arm. She no longer needed to prove every forged object independently. She needed Malcolm to defend the false contract in front of the Prince Regent, and commit himself to a version of events that the contract's own impossible timeline would destroy. The Prince Regent granted Clara's request shortly after 8 the following morning. By 10, the great drawing room at Carlton House had been arranged as a formal tribunal. Treasury commissioners occupied one side, peers and royal secretaries the other, while the disputed marriage settlement rested upon a central table beneath 3 lamps. Clara entered under guard wearing the same smoke-stained blue gown. Adrian stood without the Wycliffe chain or any visible sign of his rank, his authority suspended along with his estate. Before the hearing began, Clara demanded that Josiah Crane, Sergeant Hales, Thomas, and Lady Beatrice be placed under separate royal protection. She also insisted that the contract remain visible and untouched. Sir Edmund agreed, after discovering that one of his deputy secretaries had disappeared during the night. Lord Vane entered last, dressed in mourning black, and carrying the Ashbourne estate keys he had received as interim receiver. He bowed to the Prince Regent with flawless composure. His Royal Highness sat beneath a crimson canopy, impatience evident behind the ceremony. We have delayed £300,000, suspended a duke, detained a solicitor's daughter, and nearly lost a naval warehouse, he said. Someone will explain why before this room adjourns. Lord Vane requested permission to speak first. He described Clara as a gifted but ambitious woman who had used knowledge acquired in her father's office to forge a marriage settlement, manipulate Adrian's guilt, and create false evidence whenever suspicion approached her. He displayed Pike's letters, the apparent bank transfer to Josiah, the joined tally recording 1,200 barrels, and Henry Whitmore's posthumous payment list. Each item was placed before the Prince Regent, with the confidence of settled fact. The tragedy, Malcolm concluded, is that my nephew's affection has transformed a simple fraud into a threat against the crown. Adrian did not react to the insult. Clara asked only one question. When did you first learn that the settlement contained a repudiation clause? Malcolm hesitated. 2 days before the wedding, during my final examination. Then you knew before the ceremony that Adrian's public rejection would activate the crown's claim? I suspected it. Yet you waited until he stood before the altar to show him the accusing letter. I required witnesses to his decision. Clara looked toward the assembled peers. Malcolm had taken the bait. So the humiliation was deliberate. You could have stopped the wedding privately, but you needed a public repudiation, because the forged clause required one. I needed witnesses to your deception. And yesterday afternoon, before the ceremony, you requested this tribunal's involvement. Sir Edmund produced the original summons register. The entry had indeed been filed at 4:15 on the previous day, under Lord Vane's authority. Malcolm argued that he had merely warned Carlton House of a suspicious settlement. Clara asked why his request specified that Ashbourne lands would become collateral upon public repudiation if he had not yet read the supposed hidden clause. He offered no direct answer. The Prince Regent leaned forward. Read the contract, Miss Whitmore. Every relevant line. Clara took the settlement from the table. The same document Adrian had abandoned beside her at the altar now lay open beneath her hands while the man who had condemned her stood publicly at her side. She began with the original property provisions, reading her father's precise descriptions of the Ashbourne farms, mines, London houses, and K-rights. She identified the numbering, margins, witness spaces, and blue binding that appeared consistently across the first 12 sheets. Then she reached the inserted page. Her voice remained steady as she read the clause pledging the estate against 6 naval certificates. Murmurs spread when she read the second condition. The Crown's review would begin only if the Duke repudiated the bride before witnesses. Lord Vane submitted his request before that condition occurred, Clara said. He then delivered the accusation at the only moment capable of activating it. He did not predict Adrian's reaction. He constructed the event that made the false contract enforceable. Malcolm responded that Clara herself could have informed Carlton House anonymously and arranged the scene. She expected the answer. Then let us examine access. The original 12-page settlement remained in my father's office until Lord Vane collected it 3 days before the wedding. During that period, the inserted page did not exist. My father's working ledger records 12 sheets, and Lady Beatrice saw the 13 binding holes immediately after the ceremony. Lady Beatrice confirmed Clara's observation. Clara then produced the invoice Thomas had recovered from her father's desk before royal officers searched the house. It showed Lord Vane's purchase of crowned heron bond paper 9 days earlier. The inserted sheet bears that watermark. Lord Vane claimed my father bought identical paper through his account, but Henry Whitmore died 7 months before this batch was delivered. Malcolm accused Thomas of stealing or fabricating the invoice. Sir Edmund compared it with the duplicate account record seized from Vane Chambers. The amounts, delivery date, and stationer's number matched. Clara next placed Pike's narrow-nibbed pen beside the false page. The inserted clause was written with this width of nib. Pike dropped the pen in my office after signing the false name Elias North. The withdrawal register at Deptford showed that Elias North removed the 6 genuine naval tallies hours before the warehouse burned. The register was stolen, Malcolm said. No register exists. Sergeant Hales saw it placed into the sealed iron box. Hales confirmed the chain of custody, the ambush, and the betrayal by the second guard. Josiah testified that the surviving tally recorded only 320 barrels. Malcolm pointed toward the joined tally on the treasury table. And there lies the authentic record of 1,200. Clara examined it without touching it. No. There lies your most confident mistake. She asked Adrian how many cranes operated at Ashbourne Quay during the stated delivery week. 1, he answered. The western crane was dismantled from May until July. Clara produced the estate fee figures she and Adrian had reconstructed during the journey to Deptford. Even if ships unloaded continuously, the quay could not have processed 1,200 barrels. More importantly, the certificate named 4 vessels. Ashbourne's fee ledger recorded that 2 of them had docked in Bristol that week, while the other 2 did not exist in the estate register. Malcolm claimed the ledger had been altered by Adrian. Then ask him where it is, Clara said. The room turned toward Adrian. Lord Vane took possession of the muniment room at dawn, he replied. He now controls the ledger he challenges. The Prince Regent ordered the Ashbourne books seized before they could be destroyed. Malcolm's calm began to fracture. He accused Clara of building a case from missing objects, compromised witnesses, and calculations no gentleman could verify. Then we will use an object neither I nor Adrian has controlled, Clara said. She asked Lady Beatrice to present the sealed naval warrant issued to her late husband during the same year as the certificates. Beatrice had retrieved it from her private papers before the hearing and surrendered it unopened to Sir Edmund. It carried an undisputed impression of the Prince Regent's private naval mark. Clara placed the genuine warrant beside the false contract. At first, the two green wax impressions appeared identical: the crowned lion, the surrounding motto, and the three feathers above it. Pike could copy handwriting and obtain crown paper, Clara said, but he could not create this impression without a seal matrix. One of these marks was made by the instrument held in His Royal Highness's private office. The other was made by a duplicate cut for someone who did not understand one small feature of the original. Lord Vane demanded that the comparison be stopped, insisting that a woman accused of forgery could not authenticate a royal seal. Clara agreed. "I do not ask the room to trust me. I ask His Royal Highness to identify the feature himself." She turned both impressions toward the Prince Regent and placed her father's magnifying lens between them. The entire chamber fell silent as he bent over the wax. After several seconds, the prince's expression changed. He looked first at the genuine warrant, then at the contract, and finally at Lord Vane. "I see it," he said, "and only 3 men in this kingdom knew it was there." The Prince Regent lifted the genuine warrant and pointed to the lion's left rear paw. Inside the smallest claw was a 6-pointed star, no larger than a grain of sand. The same paw on the marriage contract contained a 5-pointed star cut at the opposite angle. "The hidden mark was added to my naval seal after counterfeit supply orders appeared during the war," he said. "Only Sir Edmund, Deputy Secretary Bellamy, and I knew its correct form. Whoever made this impression worked from Bellamy's description, rather than from the royal matrix." Sir Edmund immediately ordered guards to find his missing deputy. Lord Vane stepped backward. "A secretary's corruption does not implicate me." Clara closed the contract. "No single object implicates you. The chain does." She laid out the sequence calmly. Malcolm had acquired 6 rejected naval certificates after the war for a fraction of their printed value. They were worthless, because the goods they described had never been delivered. When Adrian's marriage settlement gave Malcolm temporary access to the Ashbourne property descriptions, he recognized that the estate's quay could be used as fictitious proof of delivery. He persuaded Bellamy to prepare treasury schedules, royal summonses, and redemption drafts. Pike copied the false clause on paper delivered to Vane Chambers 9 days earlier, then reopened the blue binding and inserted the 13th page. Malcolm targeted Clara because her work in her father's office gave the accusation credibility. She possessed the necessary skill, could legally access account 47C, and had copied enough of Henry Whitmore's documents for Pike to imitate both hands. After Adrian's public repudiation activated the clause, Malcolm intended the Crown to redeem the certificates against Ashbourne. If the fraud was questioned, Clara and her dead father would bear the blame. If Adrian resisted, his estate would enter receivership under Malcolm's control. "You required the wedding to fail publicly," Clara said. "That is why you delivered the letter at the altar instead of warning Adrian privately. You needed witnesses to the repudiation, witnesses to my humiliation, and witnesses who would remember my supposed motive." Malcolm's face had lost all warmth. "It remains a story." "Then explain how you knew the authorization certificate existed before Sir Edmund opened the sealed treasury schedule. Explain why your summons request described the repudiation condition the day before the wedding. Explain why the man you claimed not to employ signed the Deptford Register under the same false name he used in my home." The drawing room doors opened. Sergeant Hales entered with 4 royal guards escorting Deputy Secretary Bellamy and the traitorous guard from the overturned carriage. Bellamy had been captured at Dover, attempting to board a packet boat. In his luggage, officers found the iron box stolen from Clara, the false seal matrix, the missing Ashbourne tally sticks, and £40,000 in unsigned treasury drafts. Josiah unlocked the box with the key he had retained. Adrian's broken wax seal still clung to the lid. Inside lay the surviving tally recording 320 barrels, and the Deptford withdrawal register bearing Pike's false signature. The custody chain Clara created had survived because Malcolm's men stole the evidence, but could not replace Josiah's key or erase Adrian's shattered seal. Faced with the seal matrix and recovered box, Bellamy confessed that Malcolm promised him 1/3 of the redemption. He had issued the premature summons, recommended the corrupt guard, prepared the drafts, and falsified the apparent deposit to Josiah. The matching 1,200-barrel tallies were newly cut from old Ashbourne oak removed from the muniment room after Malcolm became receiver. Pike held out only until the Prince Regent ordered the contract placed before him. Then he admitted copying the inserted clause, forging Clara's letters, signing Henry Whitmore's name after his death, and removing the genuine tallies before the warehouse was chained and set alight. The crescent of blood on the parchment came from his injured thumb. Lord Vane had promised Pike £5,000 and a passage to America, but after the forgery was completed, Malcolm attempted to make him the sole criminal. Pike's fear, not loyalty, had kept him obedient. Malcolm made one final effort to reach the contract, but Adrian blocked him without striking him. Royal guards seized Lord Vane and removed the Ashbourne estate keys from his pocket. He was charged with conspiracy to defraud the crown, forgery, arson, attempted murder, false imprisonment, and interference with royal evidence. Bellamy faced dismissal, forfeiture of property, and prosecution for abusing the Prince Regent's seal. The corrupt guard was charged for the armed ambush. Pike's cooperation spared him the harshest penalty, but he received imprisonment and permanent exclusion from legal employment. The forged certificates were cancelled, every prepared draft was stopped, and the Treasury released Ashbourne from the fraudulent guarantee. The Prince Regent restored Adrian's estate, but refused to end the hearing until Clara's name had been corrected, as publicly as it had been damaged. Sir Edmund declared that Henry Whitmore's posthumous signatures, Clara's letters, the payment list, and the bank transfer were all fabricated. Orders were sent to reopen the Whitmore accounts and reimburse the warehouse wages Clara had paid from her personal trust. Josiah received compensation for his injuries and the destruction of the naval warehouse, while the 5 rescued workers were granted crown pensions. Adrian then stepped before the same aristocrats who had watched Clara enter under guard. "I accused Miss Whitmore without allowing her to defend herself," he said. "I called her dishonest before our wedding guests, authorized the seizure of her papers without her consent, and treated my fear as proof of her guilt. My uncle deceived me, but every public cruelty I committed was my own decision. I ask that the record show she saved my estate, protected the crown, rescued 5 men, and uncovered the fraud after I abandoned her." He did not ask Clara to forgive him. Instead, he signed a declaration, surrendering every claim created by their engagement, and confirmed that her dowry, trust, and family property would remain entirely hers. He also offered to fund an independent office where she could examine estate contracts for women denied access to their own settlements. Clara accepted the public correction but refused his money. She opened the office herself using the restored Whitmore funds and hired 2 widows of solicitors as her first clerks. For 6 months, Adrian sent no flowers and made no declaration. He repaired the warehouse losses, testified at every trial, removed Lord Vane's allies from Ashbourne, and submitted each estate account to Clara's independent examination at the same rate paid to any professional advisor. Respect returned before trust, and trust returned slowly. When he finally asked whether she might consider marrying him again, Clara placed a new settlement on the table. It contained 12 pages, no hidden conditions, and complete protection for her separate property and work. Adrian read every line, signed it, and asked what else she required. "A choice," she said, until the final moment. On a quiet morning the following spring, Adrian waited before the altar at St. Bartholomew's Chapel. No accusing letter arrived. No uncle stood beside him. The gold ring rested upon the same stone where he had once abandoned it. When the chapel doors opened, Clara paused at the far end of the aisle. Every person in the room turned toward her, but no one commanded her to move. Adrian remained where she had required him to remain, waiting without certainty, possessing no contract that could compel her, and no rank that could silence her. Clara looked at the man who had once walked away before hearing her, then at the 12-page settlement lying openly beside the register. This time, she crossed the chapel because she chose to. When she reached him, Adrian did not take her hand until she offered it. The bishop asked whether she came freely. Clara's answer carried through the same chapel that had once whispered against her. "Yes, and let the record show that I read every word first."